It's time to return.
You're telling me to jump?
That's right, it's time to jump into Crimson Desert from Pearl Abyss, which has been a long time coming and has managed to ramp up the excitement to astronomical levels. Pearl Abyss have themselves made a big impression with Crimson Desert, having sold millions of copies already in what is a couple of days since launch. It has landed with a few issues straight off the bat. But before I get into that, the positives. Now, one of the reasons why I love the team, and I played it last year and I met the team, and I think their passion and energy in the development cycle, making their own engine in Black Space, is superb. And the quality here is amazing. It offers ray tracing straight out of the box, parallax occlusion mapping, or POM. It uses displacement maps to deliver this, adaptive tessellation on grounds, buildings, vast NPC count within an open world, and some of the best water physics in game. And it even supports 4K 30, 40 FPS modes, and even beyond with 120Hz screens in VRR. Now, after my first few hours with the game, I wanted to get my first random access analysis up on the base PS5 version, which you can see here with a mixture of all three modes, and I'll cover those as and when it needs to be relevant for the conversation, but effectively I'll detail those in a moment. And it's probably going to be the most played version outside of the PC market in general. So first things first, some problems that I did mention a minute ago that I want to just discuss, and some things that I saw around the 120Hz mode online that maybe is confusing some people and causing some issues due to the choices the team made. Now, one of my biggest concerns has always been the physical digital shift. So moving over from physical games to digital games has always been a thing that I've not been a massive fan of, but I get the benefits it offers, certainly for smaller teams. Now, Crimson Desert haven't gone down the route of relying on digital releases. They have got a physical platform out. They've got a physical release. I've got the disc. I bought it and paid for it for my own money on PS5 and waited for it to drop a few hours before launch day, so 10 p.m. on the 19th. And that was good that they actually delivered the stuff to people's houses and organised it. So that's a benefit. The negative is they've locked the disc version out with a day one patch that's required. And I couldn't play it, right? And I get that. And I know online people were saying to me, that's to stop people from spoiling the game online. I totally get that. But launch the game a day later. So have the physical disc come out a day later. It's better that the physical disc is later for those that want the game on a disc than the fact that you've locked a disc version to DRM, which means it's pointless. Because people will say it in the comments, they'll never turn the servers off. It will always happen at some point. Inevitably, it's happened multiple times. Ubisoft has done it with loads of games, as have other teams, EA. We recently had, Concord, Sony did it themselves by turning that off. And there were physical disc versions of that. So the disc itself needs to contain the overall game so you can play it without having to get involved with downloading a patch. Now, the biggest problem I've got with this is the fact that once you patch the game, yeah, fine. It's not a big update. It really is just to unlock it. But they could have just released the game later, even a week later, to allow the physical disc people to get hold of a version that they can use at any point in the future, no matter what's happening. Right now, the only way you're going to get around this with a disc is to keep a hard copy on a hard drive with the disc and transfer that across the same account that you play the game with to play it in future using the disc. Although I suppose you can use the same installation potentially with another account, but it's not that easy. You can't copy games freely between accounts on a PlayStation Network. So my main issue here, and I'm sorry to start on a negative, is the fact that you have to use a server to play this game no matter what from now and in the future. So the physical disc isn't physical at all. It's just a DRM coming on a disc format. And that is frustrating to me. So hate to start with a negative on that side. So that little whinge aside, moving into the next part that I saw online is many people are saying the game looks blurry and muddy, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One of them is the performance mode, but also the fact that the game, the team have made a choice, which is not standard, but I get it, in that they're making an operating system call, and the 120Hz mode of the PS5 has a few intricacies in terms of how it works, and it basically comes down to your TV format, HDMI 2.1, and the bandwidth. And what this means is, irrespective of the mode you play on the game, the three available, which is quality, balanced, or performance, all of them can run at 120Hz output. And again, people are getting confused between the console or the PC outputting at a refresh rate or a resolution, and the game's rendering or refresh rate being the same. That's not the same thing. So if a game can output in a 120 Hz container, it means that it can refresh faster than if it outputs in a 60 Hz container. And in this case, the balance mode needs it to get to 40 FPS because 40 FPS is divisible by 120 Hz. It's not divisible by 60 Hz, and therefore 25 milliseconds requires a 120 Hz screen. So if you have a 120 Hz screen, you need to make sure your TV has a HDMI 2.1 input, which is required for 4K 120. Now, many TVs have it, but in their menu, you can actually turn the option on and off. It's usually called like enhanced inputs. Make sure this is turned on, and that way it makes sure that your TV is running at 4K 120. And that means you'll get a 4K output no matter what mode you choose in terms of the output to screen and then the resolution scaling beyond that. So, and sometimes cables don't work. So it's 40 gigabits per second for the PS5 at this level, and the PS5 can actually drop down from true RGB to 422 or 420 chroma sampling or subsampling, and this is required to hit those high refresh and resolutions. And you can actually force this in the PS5 screen menu by choosing automatic and then -1 or -2. -1 is 422 and -2 is 420, the lowest level possible. And this might also mean you can then get to 4K 120 with the lower chroma and therefore color sampling. But also make sure that if you haven't got a 4K 120 TV, but you've got a 1440p 120, that your PS5 is set to use 1440p 120. And if all those things are not available, but your TV still supports 120 at 1080p, then I recommend you turn off the automatic option for 120 Hz. Turn it from automatic to off. And this means the game will then revert to 4K 60 for all modes, and that will negate that balance mode, sadly, so you won't be able to have that 40 Hz mode. But it does mean that the balance and the quality mode will now output at the 4K that they're intended to, and the performance mode will still output at 4K, but it comes from a lower base resolution, which I'll get to in a moment.
Watch your back.
So those important parts out of the way, let's get to the technical analysis. And the all-important question is, how does it look and run? Well, the team released the game's mode, and again, very commendable for the team. They were completely honest and transparent, released all the details, which are covered on my website channel last week. They told us the performance, the output targets, resolution, base resolutions across everything from the Mac to the consoles and even the Xbox ROG Ally. So the quality mode, as they said, targets 4K output, and it's upscaled from 2560 by 1440 using FSR3 as a base resolution. This mode also runs at 30 FPS, but the game offers a VSync option, which is very rare for consoles in the menu, and this is supposed to enable variable refresh rate, but it currently appears broken in this day one patched version, as even with a VRR screen and capture card, the game still tears in all modes. Now, I've already seen some YouTube channels with incorrect tools for frame rate analysis basically have fallen foul to the trap of this by presenting wildly incorrect and exaggerated frame times, because the game isn't presenting a clean frame every time, it's actually tearing, and it's very hard to pick up tearing. My tool, I spent quite a bit of time at the original point years ago writing that part because it's quite specific on how you pick up that. And it's not running anywhere near some of the frame times you're seeing on some of these other websites. So effectively, I would recommend that you turn VSync on and run it at the base resolutions and target rates that you've got at the moment. If you are lucky enough, and there might be some VRR screens where it works, but I've tried it on both my G-Sync screen and my LG OLED, which supports AMD FreeSync and G-Sync, it doesn't work. So it still tears on both those screens, and it tears on my Elgato capture card as well, my 4KX. So the quality mode, you're better off just capping it to 30. It's nowhere near 60 anyway, so cap it at 30 and run it. And I recommend this for all three at the moment, unless you really can get away with tearing for a very minor improvement to frame rate. Now, balance mode is next, and again, as long as you have a 20 Hz screen, this then outputs at that same 4K FSR3 output, but now lowers the base resolution down to about half of quality mode, so around 1280 by 720p, which is kind of ultra performance in AMD FSR3 settings on PC, and it also drops some settings. So ray trace, global illumination, and ambient occlusion are reduced over what they are on the quality mode. You can see that here in some of the examples with less bounce. There also objects in the BVH seem to be removed, so you can see characters are reflected and basically have a light bounce on them, but they don't have that in the balance mode, and other objects and further into the frustrum have less light bounce being sampled now. So that reduces effectively the level of ambient occlusion and the level of light bounce going on in any scene, both indoors and out. Now, the benefit is the game can now target that mean ground between 30 and 60, so 40 FPS, or really 25 milliseconds, rather than 33 of 30 FPS. And here the game starts to show some issues on performance. The quality mode is pretty much locked, so just turn that on and don't look back in terms of performance. But the balance mode can often drop frames below the target 40, specifically when large number of NPCs, dense towns, fast travel all happening, or even just riding across bridges and walking through denser areas, leaving us with a mid-30s readout at many sections, even when not in dense towns. And although the game assets and quality and textures, models and image quality are very good in both of these modes, FSR3 signs and weaknesses are obvious. Heavy ghosting happens on fast motion, such as over hands when moving against Cliff's body, or even people just running past dense foliage, leaving lots and lots of subpixel shimmer, trailing, and other areas of the game itself in terms of edges of rocks and reflections, be they screen spaced or ray traced, all happen often enough to counter that clean, sharp, and bright image, both in the quality and balance mode that FSR3 can deliver here. But you will see a very sharp and clean game overall, but it does have some artifacts and issues which can be impactful sometimes in the image quality, but it is a better balance overall, and you'll see that in a minute when I go to performance mode. But it also highlights how good the PS5 Pro version is using its PSSR2 version, which I'll get to in my next video. So the final one is the performance mode on the PS5, the base PS5. And here we start to see some of those limitations really starting to present themselves. So the lofty aspirations of 60 FPS here make some vast cuts to the game's visuals. Ray tracing is all but cooled, being very noisy now and unstable and rife with errors. Hardly any light bounce and far less AO, and just a darker game overall with less bounce, less AO. Things look more floaty and gamey in the game itself. Nothing really contacts very well. And overall, the image looks very weak compared to balanced and quality mode. And that really kind of makes you scratch your head thinking, is this really 1080p? And again, there are errors in the game itself. So some of these might actually just be bugs in the game, because I noticed that changing between modes, certainly the balance mode, had me turning off ray tracing in the room, which you can see an example of here in the pub, where all ray tracing and light shadows don't seem to be working correctly. And then I basically went out and came back in. That didn't fix it. So I restarted the game, and there you go. It looks perfectly fine now. So there's definitely issues there. So I do recommend, if you are flicking between modes and you find one you're happy with, restart the game and carry on playing. There's probably going to be bugs in that mode at the moment in terms of refreshing the render. Other cutbacks in this mode are model quality, which is severely cooled now, reducing geometric complexity, shadows, ambient occlusion, which is the only one that really has ambient occlusion in trees and foliage is quality. That's even cooled back in balance, but here it's cooled back even more. So you hardly get any light bounce and any ambient occlusion properly, so things look quite floaty and gamey in a lot of areas of the game. Tessellations heavily cut back. Parallax occlusion mapping is gone. You can see it here in the pub on the wall where everything's completely flat, and then going to balanced and then going to quality, you can see those parallax occlusion maps kind of pushes that depth into the wall, but actually they use a displacement map to push that back out, so it's not really geometry, but it's kind of effect with your eyeball based on camera position, but it works. You can see the edges of the rocks, the rugged brickwork in the pub is now visible where it's completely flat in that performance mode. But probably the biggest is resolution, with it now dropping to a native 1920 by 1080p, with TAA still running, but now it's not FSR3, so it's less ghosty, but it is more unstable. But it does accumulate image over a few frames, which softens the image heavily, and that helps make the game look very soft, because the TAA is quite aggressive, and it smears things like texture sampling and texture objects, which can look pretty poor in this mode. But the numbers themselves don't reflect the sheer impact it has on image quality, with like textures, as I say, faces, subpixel details, trees, shrubs, and others all becoming very blurry. They're hard to pick out the details, and they're all smeared due to the undersampling of all these elements now below the target resolution output, which most games do. Most games don't render like alpha effects or texture sampling itself, or even some of the objects in the game don't render anywhere near close to the output, like volumetrics or water reflections or even ray trace reflections are all subpixel sampling to kind of lower the cost. But the higher up the food chain you go for a resolution output, so 4K in the other two modes, can be reconstructed back and look much better, but it's also at a much higher base. At 1080p, these are probably half resolution, sometimes quarter resolution, and that starts to show here in the image quality. And this makes this mode a hard sell, even for those that want a 60 FPS mode. And making matters worse is the game still rarely hands in a consistent 16 millisecond frame time, with it often bouncing back and forth from 16 to 33 milliseconds like a game of Pong. Now, it can also have streaming and stuttering general areas where it seems CPU bound and memory bound quite often in the game, likely from the dynamic NPC interaction, the animation and pathfinding, and more all happening at all times as you're walking and moving in and out of people, and these little pop-ups crop up for you to interact with them. But this mode is mostly GPU and on memory bound, which is obvious in some of the performance issues noted. And another area is this mode seems to be overly dark, and this may mean that the assets and textures and lighting all actually appear incorrect in my opinion. Now you can take this spinning wheel here in the temple early in the game. In the performance mode, only the illuminated center of the wheel can be seen, but in balance and quality, the stone wheel is now visible, making me think this mode was added as a last minute option on PS5 and Series X to deliver 60 FPS. But I expect in the next few weeks and months patches will drop that will improve this mode in visuals and performance, and I actually feel that they should really bring back FSR3 at a 1440p target, or maybe bring it back at a 1080p target, and target from a lower like 720p base with some other optimizations. That may be the best balance for the performance mode, because it might actually impact performance on the GPU side ever so slightly overall without any other optimizations elsewhere in the engine and the renderer. But overall, I think it will close the gap up in terms of image quality between the two modes. And for me, that would be the option that I think that they should work on. I totally get why they haven't done it. Releasing games of this scale and magnitude, releasing software in any magnitude, takes a lot of optimizations and certainly takes a lot of choices. And in those choices, you have to pick your battles. I'm not sitting here saying they should have done these things. I'm just suggesting things they already know, which is maybe with a little bit more time and getting things tweaked, they could probably get this performance mode to run slightly closer in visuals to the other modes, and maybe even slightly better in overall performance with just a few areas and a few more months in the oven. And that potentially means that we might see some patches in the next month or two which significantly improve the quality on the base PS5 console, and obviously the Series S and Series X versions also. Now, I will be back very soon with a full look at the PC version, which is astounding in terms of how the visual quality ramps up when you're using other technology. And again, this reinforces my point. Looking at it on PC in terms of the NVIDIA area, they definitely are leaning heavily into the RTX feature set, and that means that DLSS and ray reconstruction specifically make drastic improvements to the image quality and the ray tracing quality in the game over and above what the game itself is rendering from its engine side. So do check back for that in the coming days ahead. And that's it. That's a fast look. Hopefully it gave you some information. Here's a few more minutes of frame rate footage to feed your FPS meter. But for now, I'm out. Remember, I am self-funded, completely independent. I do this all on my own, under my own steam, with my own money. Everyone that helps me on my Patreon site, I thank each and every one of you. Remember, you can join and help me there by a few dollars and pounds a month. That really helps. You get exclusive access. You can ask me questions about anything on my database videos and actually drive the content that I create, and also early access to these videos and others. You can also read more on this and many other things on my website, but for now, I am out, and I will catch you very soon on the next one.